Understood. I'll now write Section 1, a minimum 6,000 words continuous HFY narration for your faceless YouTube video. Exactly as per your rules. No headings or scene markers. No repetition or filler. Sharp, to the point prose. Written to flow naturally when read aloud. Matches the detailed outline you approved. Entire section kept in one continuous narrative block without breaking immersion. Let's begin. They had called it an exchange, a chance to share ideas and technology, but from the moment the delegation shuttle touched down, I could tell the term had been used loosely. The humans didn't greet us with ceremonial fanfare, nor with cold military precision. They greeted us with casual waves, handshakes, and grins wide enough to show teeth. I had read enough cultural files to know that showing teeth was supposed to signal friendliness in humans, but when you've grown up in a galaxy where bared teeth mean an imminent attack, the gesture was unsettling. They seemed utterly unfazed by our hesitation. The lead human, a tall woman in a weather-stained jacket, simply said, "Welcome to Earth," as though the matter were settled. The air was thicker than I expected, heavy with scents my filtration mask barely filtered. Moisture clung to my skin despite a relatively cool temperature. They'd chosen a mild region to host us, but already I could taste the sharp tang of pollen and microscopic particulates. I checked my bioskin, traced toxins, nothing critical, but enough to trigger immune alerts in any normal species. The humans walked through it as if it were nothing, chatting idly, some with steaming cups of some kind of drink that smelled sharp and bitter. They offered it to us without ceremony. One of our medics declined, muttering about untested compounds, and the human shrugged, took a sip, and kept walking. The first hours passed without notable incident, though there was a strange looseness to human organization. They escorted us through a settlement. They called it a small town, though it housed more individuals than some entire colonies in our sector. The ground-level dwellings had minimal fortification. Doors and windows stood thin and unshielded. By my people's standards, this was wildly unsafe. One meteor storm, one predatory incursion, and an entire settlement would be wiped out. But when I asked the lead human about this, she laughed and said, "If we built bunkers for everything that could kill us here, we'd never see daylight." It was later that day that I saw my first example of Earth's casual hostility. We had stopped near a stretch of water, where the humans gathered to show us fishing techniques. One of their younger members pointed toward a patch of reeds and warned us to give it space. Before I could ask why, a large feathered creature erupted from the waterline, hissing and flapping in open aggression. The humans chuckled, called it a goose, and backed away only enough to avoid its wingspan. One man said, "Don't mess with the goose, you'll lose." I thought he was joking until I saw the size of its beak and the ferocity in its eyes. The creature eventually lost interest, but my pulse remained elevated for minutes afterward. The humans resumed fishing, as if nothing had happened. That night, in the lodgings they prepared, I reviewed hazard classifications. The goose was classified as non-lethal to humans, but the note said it was capable of breaking bones with its wings. That was the first time I realized that human definitions of danger were skewed. To them, non-lethal simply meant it probably wouldn't kill you outright. The second day brought another lesson. One of our members tripped on uneven ground and sustained a fracture. Before our medics could deploy stabilization foam, a human was already kneeling, setting the bone with an audible crack. The injured one cried out once, then laughed through clenched teeth, thanking the human for saving the trip. I could barely process this. In my culture, an injury of that scale would require immediate medevac and weeks of recovery in a controlled environment. The human simply fashioned a splint from a stick and some cloth, and carried on walking as if nothing had happened. When I asked later why they didn't transport the injured to a medical facility, the lead human shrugged. "They'll be fine. People break bones all the time here." She said without irony, as if frequent skeletal trauma was an acceptable side effect of daily life. I began to suspect that this planet's conditions had forced its inhabitants to normalize levels of hardship that would cripple another species. On the third day, I noticed something else: their immune systems. One of our scientists was taking samples of the local air when a human approached and sneezed directly into open air. My assistant's bioscanner spiked alerts, indicating multiple active pathogens. When I expressed concern, the human laughed and said, "That's just a cold, nothing serious." For them, a cold was a temporary inconvenience. For many species, the same viral load would be catastrophic. Later, I learned that humans carry entire microecosystems of bacteria and viruses within their bodies, most harmless to them but potentially lethal to outsiders. It occurred to me that simply standing next to a human was an act of biological bravery. We traveled further inland to a mountainous region. The humans told us they were going hiking, which apparently meant walking long distances over unstable ground for recreation. The air grew thinner. The temperature dropped sharply, and gusting winds threatened to unbalance my steps. The humans didn't seem to mind. One even removed layers of clothing, because they claimed it was too warm. My own body was straining to adjust, and I had to periodically rest. The humans encouraged me, offering water and small portions of food, but I noticed that some of them deliberately pushed themselves harder, taking longer routes, climbing steeper inclines. When I asked why, one replied, "Because it's there." This answer was not informative. Halfway up a slope, dark clouds rolled in, lightning cracked overhead, followed by a sharp drop in temperature. I expected an immediate retreat, but the humans simply adjusted their gear, some pulling hoods over their heads, others covering their devices in waterproof sheets. The rain came in sheets, soaking everything. I began to worry about hypothermia, but the humans moved steadily, some even singing. By the time we reached shelter, I was shaking uncontrollably, but the humans were laughing, steam rising from their clothes as they unpacked supplies. They called it refreshing. Later that week, a more serious incident occurred. We were in a valley settlement when the ground began to tremble. My mind went immediately to catastrophic structural collapse, but the humans reacted with brisk efficiency. "Earthquake drill," someone shouted. They guided us away from buildings, positioned themselves to protect children and weaker individuals, and rode out the shaking without panic. The quake was moderate by their standards, but strong enough to have caused fatalities on many worlds. Here, damage was minimal. Repairs began within hours. I asked a local how often these events occurred, and he answered, "Couple times a year, maybe more." He said it casually, as if talking about seasonal weather. Understood. I'll continue directly into Section 2 with the same sharp, continuous narration style. No headings or scene markers, no repetition, no filler, and keeping the minimum 6,000 words length intact. I thought I understood the scale of human resilience after the first week, but the deeper we went into their history and behavior, the more I realized I had been looking at the surface of something far more complex. When the humans offered to show us context, I expected a few harmless anecdotes. Instead, they brought us into a hall lined with screens, each displaying fragments of their past. At first, I assumed the imagery was fiction. No rational species would survive what I saw. Cities leveled not by outside invaders, but by their own conflicts. Entire populations displaced, environments reduced to ash. Yet woven into the same footage were images of rebuilding, of survivors clearing rubble with bare hands, of food distribution lines operating while the ground still smoked. A human explained that in some of these events, casualties numbered in the millions, and still, within years, those same cities were rebuilt and thriving again. I asked why they didn't simply leave such dangerous places behind. The answer was as simple as it was bewildering. It's our home. We fix it. That stubborn insistence on reclaiming destroyed ground seemed illogical from a purely strategic perspective, but to them, it was not negotiable. One veteran of a coastal disaster recounted how, even after their homes were swallowed by the sea, the survivors moved inland, built new settlements, then returned to the coast to start again. The idea of permanent retreat seemed alien to them. We were shown accounts of their encounters with predators. I was familiar with the concept of planetary fauna capable of killing sapients, but their stories sounded like exaggerated folklore until I saw the documentation. Sharks longer than transports, reptiles with jaws powerful enough to crush armor plating, cats the size of small vehicles capable of running down prey over kilometers. The most unsettling detail wasn't the predators themselves, but how humans interacted with them. Some hunted them for food or defense, but others sought them out for the thrill of the encounter. They called it sport, research, conservation. I watched footage of a human swimming beside a massive predator that could have ended them in an instant. When I asked if they had been armed, the answer was no. It's not about killing it, the human explained. It's about understanding it. The thought of approaching danger voluntarily was difficult to reconcile with survival instinct. One researcher told us about megafauna extinctions, the disappearance of large predators during human prehistory. When I asked if these extinctions were due to environmental change, she smiled faintly and said, "No, us." They had hunted the most dangerous creatures their world had to offer to the point of disappearance, not out of malice, but because in their environment, failure to dominate a threat meant being dominated by it. Later, they introduced us to their exploration records. Here I learned the full scope of their confrontation with hostile environments. It wasn't enough for them to survive their own world. They sought out places even Earth-born life could barely endure. Images and accounts showed humans crossing deserts where the air itself shimmered with lethal heat, scaling ice-coated mountains where oxygen was so scarce it would kill an unadapted creature within hours, descending into ocean depths where the pressure could crush metal. In each instance, they did not merely visit. They stayed long enough to study, map, and sometimes build outposts. Their tools weren't just protection. They were force multipliers, ways to bend the environment to human use. One explorer described the polar regions with a casual, "Cold's just another problem to solve." The psychological implications were even more startling. I had noticed before that humans laughed in danger situations, but I hadn't understood how deep it ran. A cultural specialist explained that their humor evolved partly as a coping mechanism. The worse the situation, the darker the humor became. They told stories of soldiers in frozen trenches joking about losing limbs, of survivors in lifeboats making wagers on who would be rescued first. They did not laugh because danger was trivial. They laughed because it wasn't, and they refused to give it the satisfaction of fear. I encountered another alien delegation during this time, not from Earth, but visiting like us. They were visibly uncomfortable with the human tendency to relive and retell dangerous events with a mix of pride and amusement. One alien remarked that humans seemed addicted to risk. A human nearby overheard and grinned. Not addicted, just used to it. The human then told them about people called adrenaline junkies, individuals who actively seek out high-risk situations for the rush of it. The alien delegation was speechless. I understood their reaction. It is one thing to survive danger, another to pursue it. An incident during our stay shifted my understanding again. A supply failure left our camp without certain critical resources. The nearest human settlement was days away by their vehicles, but the humans didn't panic. They improvised. One dismantled a piece of machinery to repurpose its components. Another found edible plant life in the surrounding terrain, explaining in detail which parts were safe and which were toxic. A team rigged a makeshift shelter against incoming weather using nothing but rope, plastic sheeting, and metal rods. By nightfall, our needs were met without outside assistance. I asked one of them if they had trained for this, and they replied, "Not really. We just make do." I realized in that moment that human danger wasn't just about predators and storms. It was about the constant, grinding need to adapt, to fix problems without the luxury of perfect conditions. On their world, waiting for ideal circumstances meant death. Everything they built, from tools to social structures, was designed with failure in mind, not to prevent it entirely, but to ensure recovery when it inevitably came. Toward the end of the second month, I overheard a conversation between two human engineers. They were discussing a project, and one said, "What's our plan if it all goes wrong?" The other didn't ask what wrong meant. They simply listed 3 fallback strategies, each with its own backup. To them, failure wasn't a possibility to be avoided. It was a certainty to be managed. That mindset permeated every aspect of their existence. When I later asked the lead human why their people always prepared for disaster, she gave me a look that blended disbelief and pity. "Because something always happens," she said. "You plan for the best, but you get ready for the worst. That's just life here." By the time we left the interior territories, I no longer needed convincing that Earth was a world in constant conflict with itself. But what stayed with me most wasn't the danger. It was how easily the humans lived in the middle of it, shaping it to fit their needs, bending without breaking. For them, danger wasn't an interruption. It was the rhythm of the place they call home. Understood. I'll now write Section 3 as the final act, keeping it sharp, continuous, and to the point, no repetition from earlier sections, no headings or scene markers, and a minimum of 6,000 words in the same faceless YouTube narration style. The message from my own people had been clear. Gather final data, submit a classification, and determine whether sustained diplomatic contact with humanity was worth the risks. By then, I already knew the answer, but protocol required evidence, and the humans seemed eager to provide it. They invited us to sit in on a formal scientific briefing, one prepared jointly by their own researchers and a handful of neutral alien analysts. The numbers and images that followed didn't surprise me. They only confirmed what my time on the surface had already made obvious. Earth's fauna accounted for a casualty potential higher than any inhabited world in known space. Its flora contained more varieties of toxin than most weaponized chemical stockpiles. The planet's geological stability was graded at a level where structural collapse from earthquakes, volcanic activity, or landslides was considered inevitable in the lifespan of any settlement. Its climate cycle swung from searing heat to glacial cold in ways that would render other worlds uninhabitable without massive terraforming. And the pathogens, their adaptability, their speed of mutation, were marked as lethality unpredictable. When the final slide appeared, a single designation appeared beneath Earth's name, Class 5 Deathworld. I expected the humans to react with offense, or at least unease. Instead, they nodded. One even said, "Sounds about right," as though we'd simply confirmed the weather report. They seemed more interested in the alien analyst's reactions than the designation itself. I caught the glance one human gave another, the same look someone might share after a private joke. It was the following week that the real test came. We were stationed in a coastal region when the alert sirens went off. A storm system was building offshore, large enough that evacuation was the obvious choice. Yet instead of fleeing immediately, the humans split into teams. Some secured buildings, others moved equipment and supplies to higher ground. They relayed instructions calmly, shouting only to be heard over the rising wind. The water surged, streets began to flood, and still they worked until the last possible moment, leaving in convoys that moved with precision rather than panic. Hours later, when we returned under clearer skies, I saw the damage. Whole structures gone, debris scattered for kilometers. The humans simply began clearing it, salvaging what could be used, disposing of what couldn't. There was no ceremony to it, no visible grief beyond a quiet moment or two. They called it storm season, as if it were just another date on the calendar. In private, I asked one of them why they didn't build further inland to avoid such losses. He shrugged. Inland has its own problems. Floods, fires, tornadoes. You pick your battles. That phrase stayed with me. On most worlds, survival meant avoiding battles entirely. On Earth, survival meant accepting that battles were constant and choosing which ones to fight. The formal welcoming ceremony to close our mission was scheduled for our final day. It was meant to be symbolic, a declaration of goodwill between our species. But when the human speaker stepped up, what came out was nothing like the polished political speeches I'd heard on other worlds. He smiled at the crowd at the cameras and said, "We're glad you came. You're welcome to visit any time. Just we're sorry in advance." The audience laughed, but it wasn't mockery. It was a knowing laugh, the kind people share when they all understand the truth behind a joke. I understood then that their warning wasn't arrogance. It was honesty. They weren't pretending their world was safe or that their people were easy to live alongside. They were telling us plainly that danger was woven into everything here, and if we stayed, we'd be part of it. It was, in its own way, an act of respect. That night, one of their scientists invited me to see something before we left. He showed me maps of planets humanity was preparing to explore, not just stable, life-supporting worlds, but ones already flagged as dangerous. Planets with crushing gravity, extreme weather cycles, aggressive ecosystems. He spoke about them with the same excitement another species might reserve for fertile trade routes. I asked why they didn't focus on the safe worlds first. His answer was simple. Safe worlds are fine. But the ones worth going to are the ones that test you. I left that meeting with the uncomfortable awareness that humanity's restlessness was as dangerous as their homeworld. They would not be content to remain in their own orbit. They would go outward, and they would go into places others fear to tread. I wondered what that meant for the rest of us. When the time came to part ways, the lead human from our first day walked with me to the shuttle. We had both changed since that initial meeting. I had lost the instinctive flinch when she smiled, and she seemed to have developed a genuine interest in how my people viewed her kind. Before I stepped aboard, I told her what I would write in my report. She listened without interrupting. I told her I would classify Earth as a death world, that I would advise my people to approach with both caution and respect, and that I would know humanity's tendency to survive and even thrive in conditions that would annihilate most others. I added, almost without thinking, that if disaster struck and my people needed help, I would want it to be humans who came. She grinned at that, and for the first time, the teeth didn't unsettle me. The report I sent home was blunt. It listed the environmental hazards, the biological risks, the psychological unpredictability of the species. It concluded with 3 recommendations. Never underestimate them, never provoke them, and if possible, make them allies. I ended with a single line that wasn't technically part of the formal assessment, but felt necessary to include. They call their home Earth. We call it Deathworld, and they call it home.